All right, and we're COMP308, and it's week 2, and it's part 1 of day 1. Right? We have kind of a day 1, day 2 schedule for COMP308. Tomorrow will be day 2. So last week we kind of did a little bit of an intro about what this course is about emerging web technologies, and kind of the things that we're going to be exploring. We had a bit of technical difficulties with the projector, thank God, in that other room, but this room looks like we're okay. We did sign up with GitHub, but I wanted to talk about GitHub and why it's important today. So I'm going to start off with that this morning. And then what I'm going to move into is Foundation 5, kind of an intro today, and then talk about, if we have time, we'll see if we can talk about assignment number 1, which I'm planning for a couple weeks from now. I want to give it to you as soon as possible so you start on it. It's going to take a couple weeks. If we have to move the due date, I can do that as well, because I'm kind of gauging it in terms of your skill level, right? So I'm not sure that all of you can do everything that I require. So if we need more time, then I'll move it out a little bit more, right? But it's a basic website that I'm going to get you guys to build, right? And it's going to be a few pages. So if you have never done web design before, this is your chance to dig in and get it done, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And if not today, then it'll be tomorrow. We'll talk about it, see how the time goes. So let's get started with just talking about GitHub a little bit. So we signed up last week to GitHub. Sorry, and I got to check to see if you guys can see what I see, because my resolution is a little bit different than yours. And I'm just going to just reduce the size of everything just a little bit. So I want to talk about what GitHub is and why version control is important. Because we said, I told you get onto GitHub. I want you to get to GitHub, but I didn't tell you why. We didn't have time last week, really. So it's not fair for me just to tell you that kind of stuff. And because I make GitHub so important in all my courses, I don't think it's fair for me not to really talk about what it is, why it's important, and why I want you guys to use it, right? So I think we're going to start there today. And besides, we're talking about emerging technologies, and really, it's a cloud service of a type, right? It's a way of you syncing up your work on the cloud and creating a workflow for yourself as you work as a designer, developer, what have you. So you store your stuff up on GitHub. You can collaborate on GitHub, which is something we're going to talk about a little bit today as well. I'm going to show you how to do that. So when you work with another person, you kind of understand the workflow. We're going to do a little bit more GitHub throughout the time, because one of the biggest issues people have is they're like, Tom, I had a great time with your course, but GitHub was a pain, right? We don't want to make GitHub a pain. We want to make GitHub something that you guys understand and that you use as part of your workflow. But in order for us to do that, you got to use it all the time. One of the issues is also that I might have a requirement where I say, okay, put your stuff up on GitHub and share your files. And so what people do is the last minute, after they're planning their stuff, they throw things up on GitHub, right? So really, it's not for version control. It's just a way of sharing your files. And we don't want that to be the case. We want you to be able to use GitHub as a way of, versioning your code. And what that means is, as you move forward, you create new versions. GitHub keeps track of where you're at. So again, you might think, hey, what does this belong in emerging technologies? And to me, this is almost like a support technology, an ancillary technology that you want to add on as you work with your web design, or if you're a programmer or whatever. Also, from a job perspective, we got to talk about this. GitHub is a great way to get noticed, right? If people want to take a look at your work, they want to look at your code, and you're going to an interview, you say, look, you know what? You can always find me at GitHub. Here's my address, and I've got my code up here. This is the stuff I've been doing at school. This is the stuff I work with some of the tools I developed, and so on. And so people can actually look at your code, right? Because I think that's becoming something where it's not enough nowadays to say, hi, I'm good, yes, I understand, on the interview. and they look at these, they talk about the behavioral aspects. Sometimes they also test your knowledge, and most often than not today, in today's world. And a great thing to say is, well, take a look. Here's an example of some of my work. So on that, yeah.
I just wanted to mention a good practice if you're going to be using something for a business world, to make sure that you name it accordingly. Your legal name fits. Using your gamer name does not.
Well,
one example was one guy, he made his GitHub Venom Paw. That's not going to go well over in an interview.
You know what? You'd be surprised, actually. Sometimes you would think that's true, but depending on what the interviewer is looking for, right? I think anything's better than nothing when it comes to your GitHub account. And I think from a social network perspective, right, because GitHub can also be used for social networking with other application designers of different kinds. It's there. It's another opportunity for you to connect with people, right? So yeah, I would agree. I mean, if you want to be professional and use your full name, that's the way to go. And most designer developers are in the industry do. But there are several others who have their own little code name, a gamer name that they use as well. So it's you just got to watch it that it's not offensive in some ways. And I think I know it's kind of weird when I say try and be politically correct, and people will nail me for saying that. But unfortunately, it's just the way things go sometimes. So yeah, be sensitive to what you put up there. You can definitely choose whatever your name you want. You don't have to use your email address that you've used since you were in grade 6, right? You can make a new one. Email addresses are free to make a lot of times with Gmail and with Hotmail and Outlook and all that stuff that's out there these days. So I would agree. So let's talk about a little bit what GitHub is, what version control is anyway. So we talked about this, when you guys signed up for this last week. So I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to put these PowerPoints up on eCentennial eventually. So really, what are we talking about here? We're talking about revision control, right? Also known as version control, and source control from a Visual Studio perspective. They're all the same things, pretty much, right? Really, it's just, like it says here, an aspect of software configuration management. And configuration management actually is really is a term that's been accepted in the industry, especially from an ITIL perspective. Hey, here's something that you guys may have not heard of these days, and I'm going to see if I can make sure my screen adapts to the size of what you guys can see up there as the same time as what I'm recording. But ITIL is actually something that I would recommend. I'm not going to say it's a emergence technology, but I think it's an ancillary practice, if you will, right? So it used to be known as the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, but nowadays, when it comes to ITIL, it's moved on, right? It's become more of like the IT service management kind of de facto standard, and in that practice, they talk about certain terms, like, for example, configuration management, service management, capacity management, availability management, and all these kinds of things. And a lot of times, being ITIL certified these days is a plus in terms, from if you want to work for the government or for the banks or certain things like that. They require you to have at least a foundational knowledge of ITIL, right? So it's interesting that when you look up what version control is, they also mention this software configuration management idea. And also it fits into the systems analysis and design, systems development lifecycle, which is the software configuration management piece, which is we know as version control. So you need this kind of stuff, right? So basically when you make a commit or you make a change, you get, up on GitHub, you get something called a revision number, right? So every time you make a commit, you get this little special number. An example would be revision 1, revision 2, revision 3. But on GitHub, it even goes further, right? And most revision control systems or version control systems, source control systems, like can keep going. They're all the same. They're synonyms for one another. They have this kind of special number that you get. So let's take a look at some repositories here to give you an example. I'm going to go into one of the games I built, Starbase 12. And I've got 3 commits here because I did a kind of an update to Starbase 12. And if you notice, each commit has this weird code next to it, right? But these are the revisions, right? So each revision is a special number that's different from every other revision, every other commit, if you will, right? And that separates them compared to other ones. And they're happening, they get generated on the fly. So now they also have a timestamp. An example of this would be, if you notice, this is December 9th, a couple of December 9th, and there's one on December 10th, right? With a little bit of a commit, kind of a message that tells you what we did. If I go back to the original one, and I want to show you, let's say when I started building Starbase 12, for people who've seen it, right? Here's 17 commits in the first version, right? So again, I try and commit every major milestone. When we do programming as we go, we try and make that commit happen, right? Because what happens is, you're coding and you're trying to figure out, okay, so how often do I have to commit? Is it every 5 minutes? Is it every 10 minutes? Is it every hour? How often? There's no real standard. I think what I would tell you to do is at least every milestone, when you make a major change, commit and sync, right? You don't also have to sync every time. You can do a bunch of little commits on your machine first and then do a sync where you sync all 3 of them or 4 of them up at the same time. So this is great when you're working alone. And what we'll talk about, there's some challenges when you're working with others. That can be a problem when you're talking about version control. So here's some. So this is the initial commit. I created my Starbase 12 base project. This is my second one. I added a particle explosion, right? To parts of Starbase 12, like commit 3. I added a phaser class and a phaser strafing capability to my ship. I added enemy and Starbase objects. And by the way, these are different days, right? And like I said, this took me about 3 weeks to build, right? And starting in November of last year, right? So partial collision class, added phaser tracer, updated collision manager and beam weapon manager, added enemy firing capability, right? And so you see every major commit, there's something going on, right? Added photon torpedo, modified enemy AI, right? To kind of understand. So all these things would happen every single time, right? As I'm moving forward. And that's what I need you guys to do. When you guys put together something on GitHub, I want you to save your work every major commit. Okay, so that's really when we talk about revisions, is what I'm talking about here. And again, each of them is kind of associated with a timestamp, and you can compare them, you can restore them. So in other words, you can merge them, so you can go back. So originally, you're at a certain space, a certain place in your revision. You've got you did something, and now somehow your project doesn't work. It used to work. Now you did something, and you don't know what it is, right? Well, you can compare what you did from this revision to the last one to say, what changes did I make? Oh, here, all right? Or you know what? There's a lot of changes I made. I don't know which one of these changes messed me up. Let's go back, and you revert, right? So this is the kind of stuff that revision control allows you to do. And again, you can do it locally, right, in your local repository, and you can also do it on the web, on the cloud. So what is this Git we speak of anyway, right? Well, again, it's a distributed revision control system. That's what it is. It was initially designed and developed and kind of deployed in 2005, right? So a little bit back now. Hey, it's 10 years, right? For Git, right? And you might say, well, how is this emergence technology? Because this still is something that not everyone has adopted, believe it or not. People still don't get it, right? That you can't just code in a vacuum. You can't just code on your own and then your dog ate your computer and then your code's gone, right? Or code on a stick and you lose your stick, you leave it at school and it's gone, right? Please don't do those things, right? These things, you won't survive in the real world if you don't have a backup for your code. So again, you have this, every Git repository is a full-fledged repository with complete history and full version tracking capabilities. So this Git, when I say Git was originally a a command line version where you would kind of connect to Git locally on your machine. Now you can install Git for Linux. We're talking command line locally for your machine. You can do it for Mac and PC and never connect with GitHub, right? This is just for your own version control. So if you're worried about a public repo and all that kind of stuff, a lot of your work can be done, kind of on your machine until you're ready to put everything up online, right? So it's not like you can't protect your work. Then, of course, GitHub emerged, right? It's a GitHub is a Git repository that's web-based. It's a hosting service that they offer. You can also set up your own website on GitHub, right? Which is kind of interesting. They provide that for you free, so you can create your own little web service if you want. So let's say if you're creating a website and you want everyone to kind of see some project you're working on, you can certainly create a simple website. And actually, it's pretty. You can make it interactive as well. So again, Git was a command line tool. GitHub gives you this web-based UI that you can kind of go on and kind of connect with. Here's 3 good reasons to use GitHub. Version control, like we talked about. You keep your code up in one place. So example, if you're working on multiple computers, you have it, let's say, at home, and then you want to work, you're at work as well, you're a commuter, those kind of things. Really, really good things to work on. And the third thing is the collaboration aspect, which means, hey, I want, me and Lily are working on a project together, and I'm working on the design, and she's my developer, right? So I'm going to work on the design elements, right? I'm not going to touch her stuff, and she's going to work on the development side of things and make my website work, right? Kind of thing, and that's fine. People work like that all the time. Or you know what? I'm working with you, and we're developing a game, and I'm going to do the graphic assets and the sound and test all that stuff out. When you're going to work on the functionality, right? People do that kind of thing. Sometimes people work on the same thing at the same time, and that's when people get into issues. Example of if we're both working on index.html, that's bad. Don't do that at the same time. One person work on something, someone else work on something else. And even then, you have to kind of understand the workflow when you check in and check out. And we'll talk about that as we go on. So those are the 3 good reasons that I recommend it. You can also install something called the GitHub client. So we talked about signing up to GitHub, but if I go to GitHub now, and I'm just going to use my incognito mode for a second, right? And I recommend this, by the way, if you have issues with GitHub, sometimes this resolves some of the issues. If I can actually type. How about typing, Tom? Yeah, typing. If you skip down here, so you don't go to your sign up screen, and you use incognito mode, and you kind of skip down here. If you notice, there's a space down here that says, "Hey, download GitHub for Mac." If you're a Mac guy. If I switch over to Windows, and I'm just going to do that right now by launching my virtual machine here, it's going to look a little bit different. I'll just go there in a second. Well, it'll recognize the fact that I'm on Windows or Linux or whatever, and it'll ask me to download a client for the operating system that I'm using. So what does the client do anyway? Well, it's a little different than using GitHub. It actually sits on your actual system in front of you, right? And what it does is it gives you another opportunity to sync with GitHub outside of the web, right? So you don't have to actually connect to the web and go to GitHub. You can use your client to do it, right? So little app that sits on your machine, and whether or not you use Visual Studio too. Like what if you say, well, Tom, you know what? I love the web, but I don't like Visual Studio. We talked about this kind of yesterday and the day before we got together. And I want to use brackets, or I want to use something else. But I still want to connect with GitHub. And you know what? My IDE of choice, I like Notepad, right? Notepad++ for some reason. And I still want to connect with GitHub. Is there a way to do it? Yes, there is. And this is the easiest way to do it without using any command line at all, right? Which is download the client, install the client, and then from there, you can still do some of the same things manually. And that's how it used to be, by the way. We used to manually connect with GitHub through command line as opposed to doing it automatically or through your IDE. So let's go back. So I'm just going to kill this. A couple things we were working on yesterday. And I'm just going to go into GitHub on this side to show you that it's kind of the same thing. I'll go into incognito mode on the Windows side. And again, it kind of detects how I'm coming into GitHub. And on the bottom, if you notice now, it'll say, hey, download GitHub for Windows. So whether it's Windows or whether it's Mac or whether it's Linux, Linux has its own little one. It's not the same in terms of how it comes down from their site. They have other ones that you can download through their software downloading tools. But for Mac, and if I was to download the GitHub client as an example, I think I still use it. The challenge is, there's so many tools, and we're going to talk about that as well. How do I develop a good set of tools, and how do I continue to use them, right? Because it's just a matter of choice. Like if I'm starting to do this kind of stuff, these choices. Hold on a second here. I'm going to kill myself looking for it. Here it is. So here's what my GitHub looks like for Mac, right? So same kind of idea, very simple interface. And what you can do is it looks at different repositories, and you can add repositories in sync with the stuff up online, right? So it's just a little app that kind of sits inside on your machine, and again, you can use it separately from the GitHub client online. Same thing with Windows. I have it over here, right? And you'll see that there's a lot more repositories I've got here, and it's going to try and. It's funny that it does this all the time when I'm running my virtual machine. It keeps extracting it. But the great thing is that it detects or knows about my repositories that are local, and then it tries to sync them up with what's happening online. All right, so here's an example of a bunch of repositories that I had here on Windows, on the Windows side. And this is, again, it looks very similar to the Mac side. And if I was going to, sorry, I got to make sure it fits in the screen for you guys. La la la. Here we go. And let's make this a little bit, pull it in a little bit if I can. No, I cannot. But I'll do it from here. No. If I go to options on the client, right, I can also do things like scan for repositories. And it'll basically scan to say, hey, you've got a bunch of these new repositories like Starbase 12. Let's just do those ones because I have my Starbase 12 stuff, right? So let me just add those repositories in there and kind of sync them up, so to speak. So I want to add them in. I kind of do an add, and then I update. And when I do that, I have my Starbase 12 repositories here now, right? And if you notice, if I want to sync, right, it's going to try and synchronize the stuff I have online with the stuff I have locally, and it did, right? It's very, very quick. So this is not only a way of accessing it through Visual Studio, but physically accessing it here with a tool. So I highly recommend you download it. Sometimes it also, especially for Windows, fixes up errors that you may have because it adds in additional tool sets and command line stuff that sometimes fixes problems with people who have issues using the Visual Studio tools. So GitHub client. Okay, so that's your GitHub client. And again, we talked about the one for Mac. We created a GitHub account, so we're going to skip through this part. And you can choose different service levels. You can choose if it's free or not. We talked about creating a repository, but the place to create a repository for some people is still a mystery. They're like, hey, how do I do that? How do I create my repository? But it's really quite simple. It's really at the top right corner of your screen. Just kill this for a second. So you're here, you're in your account. I'm just going to go back to my account. And you want to create a new repository. It's up here. This plus will allow you to create your new repository. If you notice down here, there's this other thing that says new organization, right? And that's a different thing altogether. I believe with your regular account, you can only create one, right? I haven't done it because I don't need it, but you certainly can explore that for yourself. And there's lots and lots of tutorials and so on that are out there that'll tell you kind of what an organization is, how to use GitHub, and so on. So there's a new repository. When you create a new repository, it's going to take you to this place here where you can say, hey, what's my repository name? Here's my owner, that's me, right? I can choose a description for my repository, and sometimes when you're not working with other systems, you can choose to initialize the repository with a README. You can also add a README later, but what a README file does is it adds more descriptive or details for the person who's checking your repository out for the first time. So they're looking at your repository, trying to figure out, hey, what is this repository for, right, as an example. And you can put in some more details, how to install, download and install your files, some other details about how things work. And we'll get into this more as we go. But it's kind of a service that we can use once we create a repository. Like, for example, I'll make one for us today, just for this example. So I'll say COMP308, and we'll say lesson 2, right? Lesson 2. I can make this in any way. I just can't use, it has to be a legal or a proper URL name. So I can't use spaces. I can't do anything like that, or special weird characters. As long as it complies with that and it's not taken by inside my own repositories, then there's a check mark, which means I can use it. I can't flag it as private because I need, if you notice, to upgrade my account to do that, right? Or if you're a student, there is an educational version that you can also subscribe to that'll provide you, I think, with one free private repository. But let's just make a public one for now and create it. And then from there, I get this, yes?
What about the client that is on your computer? Then you can create repositories
Locally on your machine.
but they're private.
Well, yeah, because you're not connected to the internet. That means you can still do version control when you're on the train, or as an example, or when you're on the plane, right? You don't have to connect to GitHub when you're doing private repositories, right? So the idea here is that you use a repository, to create this. This is the URL to kind of connect with the repository online, right? And again, we kind of talked about this before. This URL here, right? But I can also choose a button that we didn't choose last week, which is once I create my repository here, again, I can connect to Visual Studio, but let's say I'm not using Visual Studio, and I'm not going to do it right now. I'm just going to use GitHub with my Git tools, right? So here's my repository, and I want to kind of create or connect with it up online. Where there are ways of doing a clone repository, but there's nothing in this thing right now, right? Like there really isn't anything here, right? So for me to create something in here, it doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, now it says, look what it says, set up in desktop, or you can grab the link. If I click this set up in desktop, right? Now I'm on the Mac version. If I click this button, it's going to say, hey, download GitHub for Mac, right? And it's going to ask me how to do that. It's going to tell me how to do that and kind of pull that. If I go back on the other side, though, if I go on the PC side, right, and I'm just going to get out of incognito mode and go back into GitHub for myself. It's almost like I'm using two computers here. Think of it that way, right? Both machines have their own signature, right? And if I go back to my repository, here's COMP308 lesson 2. I just created it 2 minutes ago. But there's nothing in it. It's just this. And if I say set up in desktop, it's going to take me back. And it says, hey, you want to launch the application, right? And I'm going to remember my choice. I'll launch the application. What is it going to bring up? The GitHub client, right? It should bring up the GitHub client. But it doesn't mean that it will automatically. There it is. What does it do? This is how simple it is, right? Once it does this, it brings up the client. It tells me, hey, where do you want to put this thing? It asks me, like, choose the directory you wish to clone this COMP308 lesson 2 into, right? And so I can choose my standard directory, which is GitHub. Right? I just made a GitHub directory or folder in my documents folder, right? Now you can do whatever you want. This is something that makes it easier for me. So I press OK. And when I do that, it says cloning, right? And if you notice here on the left, here's my repo, COMP308 lesson 2, right? Now the great thing about the tool, right, the tool itself, and if I go back into my GitHub folder, now this is the actual GitHub folder that I have here, and if I go search for my the folder I just created, right, because it was COMP308, here it is, right? I go in there, there's nothing. There's just this Git, a .git kind of hidden folder that's going to be connected here. What if I add something in here, like randomly? Like if I go in here and go new, and I come in here and say, I want to add in a text document, right? And I want to call this, instead of, new text document.text. I'm going to call it index.html here. I'm not using Visual Studio, right? I'm just, typing away. And in here, I want to kind of edit it. So I want to open it up with another editor like Sublime Text. So here's Sublime, right? And again, you can download Sublime free. Yeah, I'm not going to use package control. And in here, I want to start typing away. So I'm going to start typing some stuff, kind of in the in this document. So here's my HTML stuff, right? And I need a doc type. I know that. So I start typing a doc type. And if I'm wrong, if I don't know how to do stuff, and most likely I will, right? I will be wrong because maybe I can't remember everything offhand. It's okay, right? Because the great thing is, if I do a header, right, and body, actually I probably just type that with Sublime. Some basic stuff. And this, let's say there's nothing in there, right? So I'm just going to save this as it is. You don't have to follow along, guys. I'm just showing you, creating a very simple, stupid, empty file, right? Now, if I go in here, I've made some changes, yeah? Now, if I go back in here, whoop, automatically, my client detects the changes that I've made, that I have a new file, that I've got a couple of empty issues here. Look, it's a new file called index.html, right? And you know what? Added a silly example file for you guys. I can put in whatever I want, right? From my commit message, right? Commit to master. But this is committed where? Locally, right? I haven't actually connected it online, right? In order for us to sync up, we have to commit and sync. Those are the two stages we have to use, right? So if I go publish, right, then it'll try and connect with the with GitHub online. And once it's done that, as an example, it's published it up, right? It says added a silly example for you guys online, right? And you can see that now it's synced up. If I want to check my GitHub, if I refresh, right? Hey, here it is. Added a silly example for you guys online, right? Here's my index.html with this, and it says I added it in. I authored it 39 seconds ago. And here's my commit code, which is right here, right? And it also says a couple things. It says one branch, right? And it also says one contributor, because I'm the only guy that put things together. Hey, I'm going to invite somebody to join me on this thing, and so they can modify index.html. I think I'm going to use you, right? Just because, right? So how do I add a contributor, right? Which is important to kind of do. So if you notice here my settings, and here inside my settings, I can go to collaborator, right? Let me go back and show you that again. So here's my repo. It's a pretty empty repo, COMP308 lesson 2. I'm going to go to settings. So you want to work with a friend, right? Click on settings, then collaborators, right? And then it says, hey, what's the password for my repo, right? Because it won't allow you to add a collaborator without confirming that you're doing it. Because imagine if you can just go on somebody's site and add a collaborator. Now it's you, and steal the code or do something, right? So you need to be able to do that. And then it says the repository currently has no collaborators. So search by username or full name for the collaborator. So Lilia, what's your how do you do your, what's your username?
It's the email address, right?
That's your username. Top right corner where it says, see how mine is Tiliopoulos, my last name?
I'm still logging in.
You're still logging in?
I think it's really a 0R2.
Lili?
YA.
YA? This one? See how it finds it? All of our users are listed here. So when you start looking for a user you want to collaborate with, it's literally like I'm going to add a couple of you guys. Don't worry. It's not going to just be one person, right? So let's just add Lilia here, right? I'll add her as a collaborator. I want to add somebody else. So why don't we add you? What's your username? MOHA. Yeah? There's no space. No. What's your username? Masoor, is that what your last name is? What's your last name?
you have one.
Like this?
Yeah.
See?
I guess that's me.
Is that you?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
So if I add you, it could be somebody else somewhere else in the world, right? We don't know, right? Okay, one more. I'll add you.
R-A-C-H-I-T.
What is it?
Rachi. R-A-C-H-I-T.
R-A-C-H-I-D.
C-H-I-T. T.
T?
P-A-N-D-Y-A.
The one. This one here, right?
Yeah.
All right. You're at it. Okay, one more. I'll add a bunch of you guys, all right? Okay, how about one of you guys over here? How about you? What is it? Yeah? Z, X, Z, Z-H-E? 19? Okay. So you see how easy it is. I can add as many as I want, right? Okay, so I've got all these collaborators, and it says, hey, I'm giving you full access to the repository, which means you can delete it, you can do stuff, you can add to it, right? So once I've done that, I'm just going to go back to my repository here. Now I only have one contributor because no one else has contributed. So I want you guys, people that I've given access to go to my repository. You should see it, that you have access to my repository, this COMP308 lesson 2. And I want you to add a file.
Do we go through our account or do we have to find you?
You can go through my account, right? Go in there and you can do a pull request, or you can do, like for example, try it out. Actually, I want you to figure it out. I want you to try it out and see how you can collaborate with me. Go ahead. Okay, I'll add you too, since you're cracking to be added in. Let's do it. Okay, what's your username?
Andrew. Macro.
Andrew. This is a whole name?
Yeah.
What's your last name?
Macro. M-A-C-K-L-E.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. I want you each to add in your own file, something else other than index.html. Add something else, silly. Put an image up there, add another file, right? I want you to figure it out. Go to GitHub, do a pull, or do whatever you need to do. And I want you to use your intuition, right? For a second, how to get this done. This is your interactive piece of the session, right? So far, I got nothing. I got no one added anything. You can go in, by the way, you go do this online too, right? So if you don't know how to do it, you can go up here online, and I can click on my repository here, right? And I can add a new file right here if I want to, right? Because I have access to do that with this plus, right? Let's see if I can refresh if you guys done anything yet. I still only got one contributor. Come on, guys. Figure it out.
I do not see this file COMP308. I see
On me?
intro to graphics and then
No, go to me.
slot machine.
So go to me like this, look. If you click on me, my name, and if you click on repositories, so it's Leopoulos, and you click on repositories, the first one now will be COMP308 lesson 2. All right? There's lots of them. I have lots of repositories, but you can go to this one.
I don't know how to get there.
This is the fun part, figuring it out, right?
Here?
Try searching.
You figured it out yet?
I did try searching.
Rashid?
I get
Yeah, I've done it.
I don't know. I don't see a contributor yet, man. Come on.
in here or there?
Squiggle away over there. What's going on?
How to say it?
Yeah, I put my
Please try it, and then
Oh, hey! I got another contributor. You added a new file. What file did you add in? Nothing. All right, it's okay. There it is. It's a text file with nothing in it.
Even I have it.
You did it too? All right, let's take a look. Oh, there's another one. All right, welcome. One commit. Okay. And if you notice, look at the commits that they're going up now. If you notice the commits, I've got a bunch of different people adding to my file here, right? Right? Look, I deleted one. They added. There's some other stuff they created. Added a silly example from you. There's like a bunch of different commits, and they all have their own commit number, right? Every one of them. So there's a bunch of different ones now. There's only 3 that are sitting here, right? There's only 3. but I got a bunch of commits. I got 5 commits up here with only 1 contributor so far. Did you? He deleted it.
Because there's a readme file.
Come on.
I think I need some help, or maybe something is wrong.
No, it's
Do we
nothing
have to
wrong.
clone it in the desktop?
You could. It's up to you if you want to. You can also fork it, right? That's another thing you can do. If you click fork, right, it'll actually add your especially if you're a contributor, it'll add this right into your own GitHub. So it's okay. Try it out, guys. There's only
I'm gonna try it.
try forking it. See what happens. Figure it out.
Maybe my
Oh, you're good.
For her, like, layout is different than mine, so she cannot, like, even the view.
I'll go around and during the break. I'll come up. I'll do it with you.
maybe my username is different. Than
No. Oh, maybe it's not that one. We added the wrong person.
Yeah. I mean,
Could
it's
be.
my last name. I don't know.
It
But
never
on
could
my
be.
GitHub, they have something different.
All right. So it was somebody else I added in there. Okay, let me take a look. I can always replace the people though, right? So let's go back. Could be, right?
Oh
So-
no, that's correct.
This is you?
Yeah, that is. I thought there's KH, but
Here.
oh, you found it. Okay.
Figure it out?
Yeah.
Good. So here's a test for you guys, right? We just did this. So here's a test for today. I want you to collaborate with somebody next to you, right? Somebody else. If you haven't had a chance to do what I'm doing here up online, you guys, as an example, collaborate. Create a dummy repository, maybe with you guys and the guys in the back there. You 2 guys, and maybe another couple people over here, right? If you don't know each other, it's a good way to know each other, right? In the class, collaborate together, right? And connect with somebody else, or maybe a third person, maybe you three over there, right? And create a dummy repo, right? I'm going to pause the movie while you guys do this, right? And I want you to connect and do some funny things. Put up an image, put some text up there, do a couple things, work together, right? And I want you, if you need to download the client, do it now. Download the client for your machine, if it helps you, and so on, because it's another way of connecting with somebody else. Again, remember how I did that? I went to settings. I went to settings for my repo, and I went to collaborators. So someone's going to own it, and then they can share it with somebody else. So one person has to create the repo, and the other person can share it with somebody. Okay, so let's try that out. And there's going to be some issues. I want you to figure out the issues, right? What are the issues involved when you share a repo with somebody else? And there are issues. We'll talk about them when I come back.